And I have a
Thank you.
question for you about that after. But good
Amazing.
morning, everybody. Coach Lorri Lown from Team Wilpers here with Coach John Ferry. You have the all-star crew today, the bikes, the runs, the everything. Um, Welcome to our final week of our current
All
challenge.
right.
And I was telling John and I don't know if you heard this because you were playing with your earphones, but I decided to search you last night because I was
Me?
like, "Oh, yeah," because I've known you
Yeah.
for a few years, but I was, curious a little more
hmm
about you, and you are very hidden on the internet, I will say that. You've done a good job, but I found your LinkedIn, and I was like, "Who is this young man here?" Haven't used the LinkedIn in a while, huh?
No, supposedly I've tried to delete it. I don't think you can. It just stays forever at this point.
Now why would you delete LinkedIn?
I don't
It's
because
the only one
well,
not owned by Meta.
yeah, that's true.
Maybe the way to keep in contact with people, so yeah, Oliver is very excited that you're here because Oliver is a triathlete, so,
Oh
um,
yeah, we got to
and
meet. We got to hang out in the past, like I think Chicago, maybe a couple other spots along the way.
oh, that's awesome. Yeah, he had a
Yeah,
lot of questions for Matt last week about training for multi-sport and that kind of thing, but
sure.
anyways, John, tell us who you are. I know you and I have some things in common, and I don't think you know this, but I'll share these first. My
Okay.
undergraduate degree is in theater management,
Oh
and
yeah,
I managed theaters for 14 years. I worked at the Kennedy Center, which has been in the news lately,
sure.
um, and was mostly in the LORT, the League of Regional
hmm
Theater circuit, not on Broadway as you were. But when I was looking at your LinkedIn, you have a history in finance as well.
That's true. So yeah, I was probably like 20 years in entertainment as a Broadway, off-Broadway stage manager. So
Mhm.
very similar path there. Um, ultimately, finance was definitely was part of it. Tried to leave the arts a couple times, not because it's not a wonderful place to be, but ultimately, and I think we'll get to this. My wife and I got to a point where her schedule had shifted, and we went about a calendar year without having a day off together, which was
Oh,
a bit much. So finance was before that. That was yeah. I spent 2 years in financial sales, selling mutual funds and other security products. So I think my licenses have expired at this point,
right.
but I do think everyone at some point should have a 100% commission job, as you will never be stressed again in your life after you leave that employment situation.
Well, I was at Charles Schwab. I don't know if you know that.
Really?
So I
Oh my
left
goodness.
theater, moved to California to work at a theater
Yeah,
here, and I knew it wasn't the right fit, but it was at the point in my life where I was like, I want to leave New York,
yeah,
and it was my ticket to get to California. And
yeah.
I had just gotten my MBA, and I was like, I'm going to get rich. This was in 1997.
Uh-huh.
I'm going to get rich just like everyone else here in Silicon Valley. I'm going to work for a startup, and so I went to a startup. 14 years in theater. I'd
Yeah.
never been unemployed a day.
Mhm.
And I worked for a startup and was laid off after 4 months. And I just bought a house. I was like, "Oh my goodness, what do I do now?" And then I was really gun shy. I think I had 13 or 14 job offers, and I took the offer at Schwab. So when I saw you had, like, Series 63 and Series 7, I
Yeah.
was like, "Oh, yeah, I remember that stuff." But I was on the employee facing side. Um,
Alright, man,
yeah,
yeah, did not realize this, Lori. We have known
I
each
know.
other a while, many
I know.
meetings. Yeah, this is striking information.
Well, and, Mr. Wilpers has a little bit of that history too, but not the theater side. But I was like, okay, what's the common denominator? That I guess wearing black, right? When you work in
That's
theater, you
fair.
wear black, and when you work in fitness, you wear black. So there we
Yeah,
go.
it's fun.
Yeah.
I remember Matt when he, joined Peloton. I met him, like, very early on. Because I actually have a very funny story, like, would freelance produce their photo shoots way back in the day.
I
And so
saw
Matt
that
came
too.
in for his first photo shoot, and he was like an absolute deer in headlights. He was very out of his element, out of his comfort zone. So he has come a long way. The boy's
Yeah.
gotten some serious media training over the course of time, but honestly, it's like those ladies over there whipped him into shape in a hurry. Like he showed up in like khaki pants and a polo, and I
Right.
can't remember which person it was, but they were like, "No, friend, like go see that stylist. They're gonna take care of you."
It's got it well. And for those of you who don't know, John is also married to a Peloton instructor. I think most people know this because you guys are pretty public about it on your social media, and you
It's
have
hard to hide after all these years. No.
exactly.
But yeah,
I got
so Hannah and
excited.
I, we actually met in the arts. So I guess she had been there maybe like a little bit less than a year. We were on a show together, and ultimately, that when that show ended, this little company now called Peloton started to get a little bit bigger, and that was roughly the time we went about as I mentioned, a calendar year without seeing each other hardly. It was she was working in mornings, I was working at nights. We would occasionally like pass by and say hello.
You would have
um,
Mondays off. She would
I would
have
have
weekends
Mondays
off.
off. Yeah,
Yeah,
it was a full year for sure.
yeah,
But yes.
that's good. Um, you coach. Did you ever
Mhm.
aspire to be a Peloton instructor?
No, 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 no. As you will know about as well as others, like so, my theatrical job had nothing to do with performance. It had
Correct.
everything to do with being kind of literally behind the scenes, and in a little bit more of that like management administrative role. So there were some things that were artistic about it, but no, my ambition was never to be in front of the camera. I find it a horribly uncomfortable spot to be. I'd much rather be like, yes, back in a little dark corner. I love the human interaction part of it, but no, I'll leave that to the much more beautiful people, and I will like spend my time locked in training peaks where I belong.
I know. Well, I did teach spin when I first became a coach. I taught spin for a few years and a lot of spin. Getting like $14 in class because this was the early 2000s. And I never imagined at that point that you could be famous teaching spin. I mean, we were still burning CDs at that time. There was nothing digital whatsoever. And I remember when MP3 players came out, and I had this thing called the jukebox, and it was
Yeah.
just, oh, yeah. But yeah, so the Peloton world is kind of interesting. Now, how did you evolve into a coach?
So it's an interesting question actually. I have been telling the story a lot recently, just because I mentioned my wife and I having this kind of unwanted time, mixed schedules, time apart. So Matt and I think one of our like first conversations about it was back at like the old Peloton studios, actually at 23rd Street, where he and I both were sitting next to each other in the little coffee shop they had there. And I think at the time, like I cracked out a copy, what I believe was the Daniels running formula. And I knew him, we knew each other casually. And, he kind of looked at me, and I saw him like looking back and forth a couple times, and ultimately like reached down in his bag and like pulled out the same like tattered copy of the book, and we sort of kickstarted some conversation in and around there about like our coaching ideology, very far away from like any sort of coaching business. And we realized we were aligned on a lot, had a lot of the like same beliefs. So we did some training together. We got to kind of like hang out, doing some workouts back in the day. And he asked me at one point about like, if I had ever had any interest in it. And at that point, to be honest, I was like, not really. I was like, I'm pretty like full plate over here. But in and around that time that I transitioned out of theater finally for the last time, I had to quit my job at that time because I'd promised Hannah that we were going to take this trip to Southeast Asia. And I'd been promising it for about like 2.5 years, which I thought was fairly patient on her part. But after 2.5 years of asking and being told to like wait for a better time, that was running its course. So ultimately left my job. We took a 3-week trip to Southeast Asia, and upon return, I looped back to Matt, and I was like, is this still something that you have interest in? And he was like, yeah, absolutely. And at that point, I was like, I can really give it 6 months as a trial, and we'll see where it goes. And honestly, I never thought anything would come of it. I was like, well, this could be fun for 6 months, and then I'll go back to the next show. But here we are, about like 6.5 years later, and things are going pretty well.
It's awesome. When I came on board 4.5 years ago, you and Matt, in my mind, were like one. You were Team Wilpers. And I know we had other coaches, but you were the only one that the public really saw, I think. The
Hmm.
private coaching staff, it's a little different, they're not as public, although I am bringing some of them on to the athlete briefings, which has been really fun. But yeah, it's funny that you say you'll never go back. Now, you must have been on a really popular show because it didn't close. You didn't get that break. It just ran and ran.
Well,
What was your last show?
My last show ever, it closed about 6 months after I left, was, Sweeney Todd, which was, like, the off-Broadway Sweeney Todd downtown, and then
Yeah.
several members of that show moved to the Broadway production about a year later, but it was a great show. It was still running when I exited.
It was
Um
the first production I saw on Broadway with Angela Lansbury back
Oh,
in
okay.
the
Yeah, yeah.
'80s. Yeah, because 'cause I'm that old, but yeah,
If it
I
makes you, I
still
have the actual original vinyl of the Angela Lansbury version in the other room,
yeah.
so
My, high school choir director so I started college as a musician actually and
huh.
then changed to theater management because, like you, I didn't wanna be in the spotlight, I think, because I
Mhm.
had performance anxiety, and I struggled with it a lot, and I was an
Sure.
oboist, and, but my high school choir director had lots of connections, and he took us to New York for a weekend, and we got to meet her backstage, and it was, you have the stars in your
Oh,
eyes, and she
yeah.
was just, everyone idolized her. So, um, well, that's cool. And then how did the coaching business evolve?
Yeah, so,
Or you as a
it was
coach? Either
me
way.
as a coach, so it's interesting, running was always my vocation, right? So I was running and running, especially back at that time. My dad was a coach. My dad was a high school basketball coach, and then ultimately, whether he was asked to be or not, he coached every single one of my like youth sports teams. Like he was basically like born to do it. I had a lot of certainly like insight there. But Matt actually will tell a story, and I love to throw myself under the bus. Like I'm an easy mark for myself. Like I knew what I was doing in terms of running. Like I knew how to do it. I knew how to structure my training. But in some of our early days, like my early days, like working with athletes as a coach, like boy was I hopeless and lost.
Yeah,
Matt was on some early calls with me, and then on some later calls, and he was like, "Oh my goodness, has this like evolved a lot over the
yeah.
course of time?" So it's one of those things when we bring new coaches in, because now I've had the great pleasure to like bring a lot of new people into Team Wilpers, kind of talk to them about like what our systems are, what our expectations are. But I was kind of learning it in real time,
Mhm.
and having to like write, kind of learn that on the fly. And to this day, 6.5, and I'd been coaching a little bit on the side before we started that, but 6.5 years now full time coaching. I mean, my processes have gone from completely scatterbrained to entirely streamlined. Um, and at the end of the day, it is a client relationship business. Like, as was my position in theater, it was a personnel relationship business.
Mhm.
So it's a cliche, but at the end of the day, it's the old like no one cares how much you know until they know how much you care. And when I was early on in coaching, I was
Ooh,
trying to tell people how much I knew, and that was unimportant. It was not really relevant to their scenario. What was important was how much I care and being able to take the information that I knew and translate it to make it fit into their situation in a way that was going to resonate with them. And that has
mhm.
been my journey with it. And hopefully I'll keep getting better at it as time
Yeah.
goes on.
It's challenging with tech though. So I coach private cyclists
Sure. Yep.
one-on-one, and there's so much tech out there, and so many people are very well, I won't say they're smart. I will say they have enough knowledge to be dangerous,
Yeah.
with the tech, but they don't always understand the science behind the tech, and I think that's one of the challenges. It's like taking a stats course and just learning Minitab, which is, a stats
Yeah.
platform, but you don't understand stats, you don't understand the theory, and I think that's what's really important, and many famous coaches have said it. It's 80% personality and 20% science.
Hmm.
And I think where it becomes really challenging is your clients aren't all the same person. You have different personalities. And finding how to work with each one is very interesting and challenging. And some people need a lot of attention, a lot of hand holding, and some people want you hands off and just write me a program and
Yeah.
tell me, what my race goals are or whatever. But I really believe it's a collaboration, it's a partnership, and the science is there to support the decisions we make. And I think,
Yeah.
you know, but there's also a very big difference, I think, between people who are good athletes and people who can be good coaches. So, and you seem to have the secret sauce of being able to do both.
Listen, I'm trying for sure.
Yeah.
My athletic ability is certainly not what it once was, as what happens with a few years. But you know, I think you see it in all sports, right?
Mhm.
It doesn't always translate exactly over from like great athleticism to
Right.
great coaching. And I certainly being a great athlete is an amazing head start to being a great coach, but it does take those
Yeah.
touch points and the ultimately the organization, the follow up, the things along those lines. Because it's not about you anymore. It's
Right.
not about you. It's about the
I
the
think
athlete.
I think endurance sports is different too than, say, ball sports or power
Sure, yeah.
sports, right? Endurance sports, as a coach, your athletes still expect you to get out there and perform, right? Especially if you're out there with them. And I mean, how many football coaches have you looked at and you're like, when's the last time you exercised, right?
It's been a while.
And so aging is definitely challenging, as a soon to be 60-year-old woman. I'm like, wow, okay, I have to be on my game. I have to train really hard just to be mediocre at this point and to still be able to do my sport because people expect me to. So,
Mhm.
yeah. Anyways, um,
Yeah.
so what's next with coaching? What's it like to
What
coach thousands of people at once? That's the interesting relationship here in Team Wilpers, right?
It's been really fascinating. We started the group program, I think around like 3 years ago. And it's been fascinating because my one-on-one coaching relationships are great. I mean, these are people that I'm messaging with on a one-on-one basis. And, especially on the run side, that group coaching part. And I think, obviously that now it's building on the cycling side, but
Yeah.
we just had like a real happy accident over there that like the personalities and the people that came into it are electric. They have, we've mentioned Oliver earlier. Oliver's certainly familiar with many of them, but there have been a group of people that have like carried the enthusiasm of that group. So that's nothing. I didn't do any of that. Like I could not have done that if I had wanted to, and tried to like build that sort of energy and ultimately support over there. I mean, it's awesome. Like I
Yeah.
said, happy accident is the only way I can know
Well,
to describe
but
it.
you enabled it. You allowed that to happen. And there are
I would.
people probably who wouldn't, right? They'd be micromanaging their Facebook group and
Mhm.
yeah, you allow people to take ownership. And I think that's what's important. And we're trying to do the same thing on the cycling
Sure.
side. It's not about my voice, it's about everybody's voice. So,
Yeah, and kind of in
yeah.
the same thing I was talking about one-on-one coaching, it's been, interesting and exciting over the course of a few years now to be able to see people's feedback in real time. Like a lot of times when you're writing for a group, you really don't get much. There's not much feedback. You're just kind of writing
Mhm.
and sending it out into the ether, and that's about it. But especially in the early days, there, people commenting about what they liked and
Yeah.
disliked, and my grammatical spelling errors, were all things I was able to take from one, move into another, and continue that thing going forward. I'm actually very excited. I don't think anyone knows this yet, but actually, for the first time on the next challenge, I believe Justin Harris is going to step in and take over. Only because I have this great attachment to the run challenge in particular, the whole challenge infrastructure. But at a certain point, I think one voice starts to become a little bit. You start hearing the same thing and stop paying attention. So I went to Matt. I said I felt like a new voice, a new energy there would
Mhm.
really like reinvigorate it, get someone else's different perspective. So I'm not dropping away entirely. I'll be
Yeah.
there to support Justin. I told him I'd be there to do as much or as little as he wanted. I'll still be in the Facebook groups, checking in on people. But I am excited for just another perspective to come,
Yeah.
because I'm sure you've had that. Like I have one ideology, like I adapt it to people, but I really have like one opinion on how I would recommend it. And I
Right.
am excited in conversations like these sometimes. I remember having a conversation with one of our coaches, Jason Lakritz. I was
Mhm.
asking him about fueling, and I just assumed we would agree entirely on like 90% of stuff. And he was saying stuff that I was like, this is exactly what I would not recommend. It's not that it's right, wrong, or indifferent. It's just different. And so
Mhm.
once again, I think it's cool to get different perspectives on the same thing. But yeah, it's been a very cool year. And
Yeah.
I mean, the best part of all of it at the end, other than just it being such like lively, supportive group, is I've had this opportunity to be in person with so many people in Chicago a couple years, in Nashville, here in New York
Mhm.
City when we have events. And it's always just incredible to hear how people have from all over the place have not only like utilized the training to get to where they were trying to go race wise, but use the network and the people involved in the group to like help support them along the way. That ultimately is the best part of it.
I it's the one thing that I wish we could find a way to do with the cycling program because so many folks are indoor cyclists and not
Hmm.
outdoor. And I know we have a relationship with Hincappy, and we've tried to develop the same kind of
Yeah.
meetups that you have at the run groups. And it's awesome. And I'm always so jealous. And I'm like, oh, I want to go to Chicago. Oh, I want to do New York because you're all out there with your signs and you're cheering
Yeah.
and you're running from spot to spot and you have shakeout runs. And I'm like, I really want to find a way to do that. But
I
it
know it's
definitely
hard.
adds
Bike
that next
travel is
level.
tricky. Yeah.
It is. I mean, I travel all the time with my bike, but a lot of our folks are not
Yep.
outdoor riders, although I'm working
Hmm.
on it. But yeah, no, it's great. And Justin is awesome. Justin was on the athlete
Hmm.
briefing a few weeks ago, and I love his newsletter. I get his newsletter every other week,
Yeah.
and we always talk about it because he always has really interesting things to think about. And absolutely agree with you on having different opinions. It's interesting. Brian and I often we kind of come to the same place, but
Yep.
we think about it in different ways. And I think that's important. We learn a lot from each other,
Yep.
and our personalities are a little different. And I think that's good too. So it's been,
Totally different.
yeah, I know.
In a great way, but like,
Yeah.
yeah, I love talking with Brian. One of my favorite conversations I've had in the past like few years. And we were, oh, you were in town as well. We were doing
Yeah.
recording some of those bike videos downtown. We went to that like Mexican restaurant after the crazy long day. And I realized like sitting at that table that I was having like such interesting conversations.
Right.
And that was like where the first like multi-coach recordings came from, was like immediately following that, where I was like, we should
Hmm.
just film these and talk about
Yeah.
I was like, this
Yeah.
is good stuff.
It is good stuff. I love doing the athlete briefings, and they've changed. In my role, I'm similar to what Justin's doing. I came in and took over from Matt. I mean, fill those
Hmm.
shoes, right? And I
Yep.
had some at first I modeled the first challenge after what he did and kind of felt my way through it. And then I was like, I want to do things differently. I want to do things my way.
Hmm.
And who knows, maybe someone will come in and do one of our challenges and do it differently as well. I think as long as we all have the same philosophy overall,
Hmm.
we're going to the same place, we can get there different ways. So, yeah,
100%.
it's good. I thought of a topic last night as I was falling
Yeah.
asleep, which was, well, I'll call it my bloopers reel, right? And I think this is a good one. It comes up often, and we have an FTP test on the schedule tomorrow, and so folks put a lot of weight on that. But the question
Hmm.
is, what did you do when your training or your racing doesn't come as planned? Whether I have an injury or an illness, or other things interrupt my life, I've got travel, or the disasters. I've been
Hmm.
known to show up. I forgot a front wheel for a race once, and it was 150 miles away, and it was like, "Oh, I'll drive psych today." Or I brought mountain bike shoes to a road race, or that
Hmm.
kind of thing. Um, how do you manage and how do you coach your athletes when things don't go as planned?
Sure. Well, I think here in the last little bit, unfortunately, with this like flu bug going along, I'm seeing like illness is something that's like been very prevalent here in the last like month or two. And we're coming into some for running, some very serious race
Mhm.
seasons. Half marathons kick off here in a couple weeks, and marathon season's mid-April. So injury and illness, like I always kind of look at it the same way. And injury is going to take a little bit longer usually, but illness, it's first and foremost is you have to deal with the issue at hand. Like
Mhm.
both scenarios, like training through it is a poor training choice. On illness in particular, the way I try to phrase it to people is like you're a body under stress. Your body
Mhm.
is it's attacking either a virus, a bacteria, something. Your body is working hard, even in the common cold, to bring
Yeah.
you back to baseline. So there is no such thing as sweating it out. That's a fiction. Just go ahead and
Thank
get that
you.
out of your vernacular. You're applying another stress to your body, even if it's just a little stress, like a zone 2 only. That's still a training stress that is ultimately going to set you back. It is going to make your
Mhm.
illness longer. It's going to make your recovery more difficult, and it's going to be a crappy session on top of everything else. So one of the harder things in trying to work through this illness part right now is just getting people to like stay on the couch for
Mhm.
longer, because ultimately, so you're going to recover faster. You're going to be able to get back to full training better. On the
And you're
injury
not gonna
front,
lose all your fitness in 1 week.
you're not going to
We
lose
have
all
to
your
remember
fitness in
that.
1 week.
Everybody's like, "Oh, I'm back at ground zero," and I'm like, "No, you're not." In
No.
so many ways, mentally, physically. Yeah.
Yeah, which doesn't mean you don't need to come back in a little bit slower, because it takes a while to get back to baseline.
Right.
I sometimes phrase it as like you can feel a little bit like disconnected from that fitness
Mhm.
immediately following like kind of that time off period where, yeah, it might feel a little bit harder getting back into it. It's not because your fitness is dissipated in any way. It's just you've been subpar, feel like you've been under baseline in terms of your health for a little bit, and so it just takes a couple sessions to get back
Yeah.
in. So I usually kind of break it down in a three-step way for time off in general of like injury or illness, which is like you need to come back easy only, spend a little bit of time returning to volume. Once you get back to full volume, you can all of a sudden start to phase back in intensity. And when you phase back in intensity, you kind of step three is then you resume 100% base of normal schedule. So for me, that usually tends to be like a 2 to 3 week process, like
Mhm.
based on a week off. And once again, you're not losing fitness during that time. You just kind of have to meet yourself where you are. Like it, it- you didn't choose to get sick, but
Right.
it happens. And I would love to say like it lasts 5 days and you're 100%. That's just not the
Mhm.
reality of it. And an injury is, I think, is harder sometimes. And there are always injuries in all sports. The thing that because I was thinking about this a little bit. The thing I've been seeing recently, and boy, does it just like get at me, is when I meet people and they're like, "Yeah, I've had this knee thing going on," and I'm like, "For how long?" And they're like, "I don't know, like 3 or 4 months," and I'm like, "That's crazy,
Right.
crazy! Like 3 to 4 months, like." What are you doing with your life? Like this knee
Mhm.
is important. Like if you have an injury, any sort of ache, pain, strain, etc. I always say if it's lasted 2 weeks, you have to change tactic.
Right.
Immediately change tactic. Like you can't be limping along for months and months. And naturally people are like, "Well, I go to physical therapy," and I'm like, well, that's great. Like
Yeah.
that is part of this process. But there's a strength trainer out of Boston, Mike Boyle, who by nature hates running in general, but he has an interesting description of it. Strength trainers hate running. That's the fact. But he's like, running is one of the only things, and like, we're seeing this now in multiple sports. But he's like, if you accidentally like slammed your hand in a car door and then you like went away and let it like heal for 2 weeks, like you would not immediately go back and like slam your hand in the car door again on purpose. Like he's like, you have a problem that is going to keep happening if you keep doing this repetitive
Mhm.
activity. So in comes an interesting, great opportunity possibly for cross training, going both
Right.
ways. Of if you're cycling a ton and your hip hurts, cycling more and getting PT is not going to
Right.
probably not going to be your solution. Maybe it is like 1 out of 100. Like you can
Yeah.
kind of train through those things, but ultimately, once again, whether it's illness, whether it's injury, you have to treat the issue at hand,
Mhm.
get on the other side of it, and then come back into training. And utilizing that time to do something else, whether it's cycling when you want to be running or running when you want to be cycling. That's very rarely happens. Strength training, etc. These are opportunities to get
Yeah.
stronger in other areas, but yeah, it's always to address the issue at
And PT never ends. I just wrote an article this week about it because I coach a very large group of cyclists and we're
hand.
starting to feel the niggles. We've been training
Sure.
inside. And I'm like, okay, what is the niggle telling us? And how do we make that decision of do I train through this? And on the bike, I think people train through discomfort a lot just
Hmm.
because the biomechanics of cycling are a little different. So we feel
Hmm.
things. How do I evaluate? Is it an injury? Is it a bike fit issue? Is it who do I work with? And
Hmm.
I think one of the interesting things about PT is most people don't realize unless you correct the root cause, which might be something you were born with, it might
Yeah.
be the janky hips or the misalignment or the leg length discrepancy or whatever. Unless you correct that root cause, you're going to get injured again. And so
Hmm.
PT doesn't end. You don't graduate. That's my
Yeah.
opinion. You keep doing those exercises until your list of mobility is really long, right? Because
Hmm.
those are the things that help my body work better. And
Sure.
a lot of people are like, "Oh, I did my 6 weeks, I'm done." I'm like, "No, you're not done. You will do this maybe once a week,
Yeah.
maybe once
And
every other week."
for sure, it's why I'm such a huge proponent of strength training. And
Mhm.
these are repetitive motion sports, both running and cycling, where you are, and a bike. I mean, you're literally locked into a
Locked in.
position, like your knees not going in any other direction than this. It's incredibly repetitive, and so in those
Mhm,
repetitive nature, I'll rephrase this a little bit different. Ryan Hopkins, one of our strength
mhm,
trainers here at Team Wilpers, he said something to me that resonated so deep to my core a long time ago, where I would look at his sets and it would be like 6 reps of heavy weight of this, like 4 reps of heavy weight of this. And I had athletes early on kind of ask, like, can I do a little bit more? This seems like really, really limited. So I went to him and was like, Ryan, like, what's the deal with, like, these strength workouts are like so minimal? And he was like, well, on a repetitive sport athlete like this, the absolute last thing I want them to do is repetitive strength training of like high
mhm,
rep, low weight, over and over and over again. He's like, they're already getting that. So I want them to do really high quality strengthening exercises at an incredibly slow pace and incredibly like controlled amount. And he's like, and then if they've got extra energy to go do more running and cycling, wouldn't that be a great problem?
mhm.
But that's it. It's using strength training to train like the different planes of motions. In essence,
Right.
it's similar to PT, right? PT at its most like fundamental form is like a little bit of strength training. They kind of reel you in with the massage, but then they make you work out
With the
after
stem
you
and the
once you
nice
get there.
things and yeah.
Yeah.
Blood
And
flow
they're
restriction, oh my god. Have you had that?
Yeah, well, like the floss bands, which like
Oh,
if you've
yeah,
ever done any like voodoo flossing bands, a little bit of blood
yeah.
flow restriction.
We did blood flow restriction when I did my knee surgery,
Hmm.
and it was so painful. I mean, the gains are huge, and you were hearing a lot about it a couple of years ago. I don't hear it with athletes who intentionally do it, not just for
Yeah.
PT, but for the gains, and the concept is you're not fatiguing yourself as much, but you're getting more benefit because you're under this huge load. Oh, it's so painful. The
Oh.
first rep doesn't hurt, and then the rest you're like, "No, I don't wanna do this anymore." So, yeah. I just folks on the webcast will know, but I just returned to strength training after a break. I didn't
Mhm.
intentionally take a break, but after the
Yeah.
pandemic, I never went back to the gym, and I wasn't really motivated to do it at home, and 30 years on a bike and at a desk and in a car, I had such a weak back. And I think I was telling my coach yesterday because I work with her a couple days a
Mhm.
week. And I think the best thing we've done for me is strengthen my back
Yeah.
and open up my shoulders again and open up my hips again because everything had gotten so imbalanced. I had one arm that almost was frozen.
Mhm.
I could not lift overhead. I couldn't get a bar behind my
Yeah.
back. And I'm like, oh man, this is great. I can do pull ups now and I can get on the bike and not feel those little niggles that I had, the imbalances. So
Well,
it's been
obviously, you
huge.
mentioned the like pain on the bike and people pushing through it. Number one
Yeah.
thing I think I see there, I'm sure you see it a lot. It's like we don't have a cycling problem or a running problem. We've got like especially like an adult problem, especially like
Yes.
adult. I usually say adult American. I realize it's probably adult elsewhere as well, but
Yeah.
we spend an incredible amount of time seated. And
Yes.
it's one of the worst possible postures that we can be in, especially in a car. Car worse than
Mhm.
anything else. Anytime your knees are above your
Yeah.
hip flexors, especially psoas, is tightening. When a hip
Hmm.
that psoas tightens, rotates your pelvis forward, put your hamstrings on stretch. For so everyone out there is like, oh, I've got these tight hamstrings.
It's
Like
like, it's your pelvis.
it's your pelvis. So
Yeah.
actually stretching your hamstring further is a horrible thing to do. It's the last thing because your hamstrings understretched. What you need to be doing is opening the front of the hip. So
Yeah.
you look at that cycling posture, and the more aggressive, as you move onto the road, dipping down, the tighter that's getting. So you
Hmm.
spend, depending upon your level, like I don't know, Matt just did that 2 hour
Hours.
ride, but
Right.
multiple hours in this crunched up little position, shoulders forward in the same
Hmm.
laptop posture we're looking at, hips coming forward,
Yeah.
in a anterior pelvic position. You better be doing something to move things back in the other direction. It
Right.
certainly could be mobility work, it could be strength training, but I'm full of stories today. But I remember I was working with a strength trainer here in the city, and I remember looking through my routine, and they were all upper body like pulls, like tons of
Yeah.
rows on rows on rows. And I was like, "What's the deal with all the rows?" And they were like, "Well, we include way more rows than like push exercises,
Right.
because what we're trying to do is counteract people's laptop culture of,
Yeah.
I'm kind of here like shoulders forward. They're like rows, we're focused on pulling backwards. They're like the push thing, like a bench press. They're like, that's great, works your chest, whatever. But in terms of like just building healthy adults, they're like the
Mhm.
rows, we're getting much more bang for our buck.
Yeah. It's, in our fall challenge, I actually added some floor cardio. So instead of being on the bike,
Hmm.
we moved in different ways because we're so linear in
Yeah.
cycling and running and swimming. So it was good. And people are like, "Oh, you're making me do something on my feet." At least it wasn't dance cardio. But I've, we have limited time as
Yeah.
adults,
Okay.
and we have lots of oh, not you and I, we're gonna just keep
Okay.
talking. But we have to make choices. But I would say, one of my biggest regrets is I didn't do all the mobility work. I did when I first started, and then all of a sudden I was training on the bike, 16 to 20 hours a week. And it was like, oh,
Yeah.
I should probably do some of these other things because I'm starting to get older and feel it. And I'm also slowing down. And so as soon as I started doing some other work, I got faster on the bike. I had more power available to me, and that was great. So,
Mhm.
and less niggles when you don't feel comfortable, if you can't be stable on your saddle, or if you feel that little tightness in your shoulder, you're like, it's always there.
Mm.
And we're out there for a long time. It
Yeah.
gets in your head after a while. And when you're doing a 6 hour ride and you have a little pain in the shoulder. So, yeah,
And it all layers, right? It's like it
it
starts at
does.
level 1 and you do nothing about it, so it goes to level 2 and then level 3, and,
Yeah.
at a certain point, you see people, like, walking feet turned out, and, like,
Hmm.
that's not what anyone wants for,
No.
there's certainly a focus on longevity these days, and
Yes.
mobility is, one of the huge parts and pieces of it, and as people lose mobility, along with strength and power, which we've already, have been talked about for a long time, but things get
Mhm.
harder and harder.
And they do. And sarcopenia is a big deal, right? So that muscle loss as
Mhm.
we age, significant once we get into our 60s and our 70s. I
Mm,
don't want to be the little old lady who can't get off the floor. So that's my goal.
mm.
And I told my strength coach yesterday, I said, you know what? I have these big goals on the bike this year. And when they're done, I'm going to be a power athlete. I'm going to be a strength training athlete. That's what I want to do for a while. And yeah, I'll ride bikes, but I want to really focus on seeing how strong and resilient I can make my body in the next couple of years. So,
Mhm.
tell me your race day disasters. What's happened?
Race day is that? Oh yeah, that was our topic.
Yeah. Have you had any?
Oh yeah, for sure. I think everybody's had them that have been out there long enough. Certainly, like the stomach issues are one of the like worst things that have happened. But they can go in so many different ways, right? Like race day
Mhm.
disasters. I've always been fortunate. Here in New York, we can race so often. Once every few weeks. Like if you're like really diligent about it and being out there. So I encourage people as often as possible, kind of to like race early and often, because those disasters happen. So if you spend 6 months preparing for a day, for a race,
Mhm.
for whatever, and you go out and something bad happens, it's devastating because
Yeah.
that was your big thing. On the flip side, if you race once every 3 weeks for 6 months and you have
Mhm.
you know s- six great races and then one crappy one, you're
Right.
there's a lot of positive takeaways there. So it's sometimes I know a little bit easier said than done, but you know I'm a huge fan of B races. Ultimately, I
Mhm.
think that's the thing that, in my opinion, it not only sets you up to learn how to not have those disasters on your A race day, but it
Mhm.
also, when the inevitable happens and you wake up feeling like crap, you have terrible weather,
You can't get a
and you do have
taxi
a
to the
disaster.
start or
I'll tell you, I just this past November or October, I walked off the Chicago Marathon race course. So you talk about a race day disaster. I've been feeling worse and worse every day leading up to that week. My training had been great. I felt awesome physically. Um, Up until 4 days before the race, when I, like, woke up with a stuffy nose, and then the next day
Mm.
was bad, and the night before the race, I woke up, my throat was sore. You know, weather was perfect, everything's there,
Yeah.
I just, like, that was not great, so I think ultimately it's like you look at it as expectation, and I knew
Yeah.
going in, I was like, "Well, this is not going to be a great day." So I had already looked at the course. I sort of knew a point that like might be a decent dropout location if I needed it. And then
Yeah.
Chicago, I was like, I can exit at the halfway mark, or I basically am going to finish the race because otherwise I'm too far away to like,
Yeah.
try to get back. And I mean, I get to mile two, just like sweating bullets. And but to my point of having a busy race schedule, I had New York City Marathon 3 weeks
Yeah.
later. So I decided not to go out and kill myself in Chicago for no good reason whatsoever. I pivoted, walked off the course, saved it for New York City. 3 weeks later, I went and had a super fun day, an amazing time, and felt great about the experience. And people were very sweet, very kind. Reached out. They're like, "I'm so sorry. I'm sure you know, like this was obviously not how you saw the day." And I was like, "No,
Right.
it's not. But honestly, like." If you knew how I felt, like walking off that course was the happiest moment of my day. Like, I mean,
It's
I
hard when you
felt,
have to call it.
yeah, it's tough.
Especially, I would think in a role like yours where it was so public, you had a huge group of Team Wilpers athletes there, and
Yeah.
they look up to you as a role model. Um, yeah, I
Well, I picked
it
that point to exit the course, actually. I got to them, I said hello, and then I walked away.
all the hugs. Yeah, um, yeah, the race day disasters. I was just thinking, racing is training, what you said. And in bike racing, we race often. It's very
Yeah.
common in bike racing to race maybe 6 times a month. So you're
Hmm.
racing multiple days over the weekend. And even in cycling events, most people will choose multiple events in the year. But then you look at things like Ironman, and it's like, oh, first of all, it's so expensive, and you're traveling, and it's a
Yep.
huge commitment and training. And you're like, yeah, I might do one a year, or maybe I do some shorter distance, some Olympic or some
Hmm.
half iron or sprint or whatever as lead in to my events. But I think the more we race, the more we're able to race. So the better we're learning the race craft. We're learning our routines. We're learning what works in our nutrition and what doesn't, and how to do a warm up and all of
Hmm.
those things. And I think, oh, this is a good segue. The same is true for testing, right? So racing
Yep.
is training, testing is training, because we have an FTP test tomorrow. Imagine that.
Yes.
I was going to tell you about the time I had to pull off the bike and use the green door, which is code for going to the bathroom on the
Yeah.
side of the
Hmm.
road. But I'll
We've
skip that
all
one.
we've all been there.
Yeah, only once for me, but it was bad. But anyways, FTP testing. Uh, in running, you do pace tests or critical power tests, I assume, if folks are training with power. Um, for the bike, the purpose of our testing is, first of all, you get a good hard workout in. Yay.
Hmm.
Who's going to go that
Yeah.
hard for 20 minutes? Not very often. But it's giving us accurate training zones. And when we have accurate zones, we have better training, right? So the
Sure.
more often we test, the better we get at the craft of testing. And so I encourage you, if you haven't in a while, take your test tomorrow. What do you think about testing, John? What are your tips to prepare for your pace test or your critical power test or your FTP test?
Yeah, well, I think first you hit the nail on the head, which like they basically become the little B races along the way, especially for
Mhm.
let's say like a lot of cyclists. Like there's not they're not if you're living in most of the country right now, there's not a lot of like race options to get out there.
Right.
Here, there's snow and ice here on the ground in New York this morning. So these are the things you do, and obviously in running, yeah, we do basically threshold tests. So you tend to pretty much the exact same thing,
Yeah.
slightly different modality, but exact same thing. And I think you've made another great point, which is like you learn how to get better at it. So racing is not something that any of us are inherently good at.
Hmm.
You see these athletes that are very experienced. They're like post collegiate, whatever. They like
Yeah.
show up. Matt Wilpers is a great racer. He just like it's baked into not just his physical body, but like his mental DNA to
Hmm.
go out and like compete. And he will
Right.
push himself harder than most people will, myself included, because it's like in his mind of like knowing how to do it, how to race, etc.
Hmm.
And we see that it's really cool, but you don't just get that by like waking up
Right.
and like going to practice. I was having a conversation. I'm long-winded, apologies, but I was having a conversation with someone yesterday, and they were like, "How do I? I feel nervous. Like my interval, all my workouts have gone great. How do I translate this to a race?" And I was like, "At a certain point, you just have to like do it."
Hmm.
And so people I know are petrified by this FTP test and
Right.
the like kind of thought process that it might not be amazing. It might like take a step back. So I was thinking a little bit about this because I saw your notes this morning, and ultimately where I put this in a bucket of, and it's the mental part of it, is that you have to, one, be, like, kind of learn how to push yourself to a place of being uncomfortable often. We're
Yes.
talking Justin Harris. We were talking about this with 5K style of racing, and this will go with bike racing, where he was like, to learn how to be a good 5Ker, you race like 6 in 6 weeks,
Mhm.
like not 1 in 6 months, and then try again, 6 months from now. Like it's
Right.
too disconnected. You don't know where you need to be at each part of that race and what the effort's going to be. It's too hard. It's like it's,
Mhm.
and if you overshoot, it's not fun because then you're
You
falling back.
walk.
And then if go too slow and finish hard, and you're like, oh, well, now my numbers might move backward, or I didn't hit my time. That's not a great feeling either. So you have to do it at like a pretty strong regularity. And the goal is not to like go up forever, because that's not going to happen,
Wait,
by the
could
way.
you
Like,
repeat that, please?
yeah, the goal is not to go up forever.
Right.
We have, as a matter of fact, there are plenty of training seasons. Talk about sickness, injury, whatever. Where it's supposed to go down. I'll throw in one of the greatest gifts I gave to myself about like a year ago was that I did a performance test and dropped my running paces substantially. I'm telling you, like
Mhm.
45-second minute per mile. I've been hurt. I'd taken a pretty serious injury, hadn't been training, came back, tried to train at those old paces, which is idiotic.
Mhm.
I was miserable. Every workout was far too hard. Did a test, dropped my paces, and all of a sudden I felt good again. I was enjoying
Yeah.
doing the workouts. I was feeling the right stimulus instead of the wrong stimulus. So in these FTP tests, that's really what it is. It's not an opportunity to drastically change your paces positively or negatively or whatnot. It's an opportunity for you, if anything else, just to test how strong you are at like pushing to these levels and being able to kind of hold that effort for an extended period of time. And sometimes you're going to feel great, just no matter where the fitness is or not. Sometimes it's going to feel great, sometimes it's not.
Well,
But
it's
each
always gonna
time,
feel hard.
yeah, it
There's no
always feels
question,
hard. It
right?
always feels
Minutes 8
hard.
to 14 or 15 are just you're gonna question every life choice you've ever made.
Yeah. But every
Yeah.
once in a while, I feel like, we all get these like breakthrough performances
Yeah.
sometimes too, right? It's like yeah, I ran a 10K recently, and I started more conservatively than I wanted to because I was late to the start. But it, then like things like really fell into gear, and I've had this experience. It was not my fastest 5K or 10K by like any stretch of the imagination, but fastest in a while. Where I was like, wow, like I'm like holding a pace, like I might blow up at any point in time. And from my racing history, I blow up all the time.
Right.
I'm like very happy to like go for the guess, like go for it and just like see what happens. And the reason is, there's two. One, it's like I'm gonna race again anyway. Two, it's like I'll just like I'm gonna go and I'm gonna see. And occasionally you get these like big breakthroughs. And I've seen that also in my own FTP testing, where it's like I get to that 15-minute mark and I expect my legs to start just like blowing up. And sometimes you just don't feel it. Like you just kind of keep going. And that's like it's like in golf. Like you hit that one good shot every once in a while. Like and that's like the whole thing that keeps you coming back for more. And then, both in racing and these tests, mentioned people being just so scared to take them. It's like people have
Mhm.
this fear of failure,
Right.
which I don't, which we have to all get over. I kind of
There is
share it.
no failure. I
I've,
try, I do, I learn.
well, there is failure in my opinion, but I fail at
Well,
least like 10 times a day, like trying to do one thing or another. And so we have to be able to, in my opinion, it's like just embrace that, like sometimes you fail. Like it's
yeah.
okay. The nice thing about failing is it's one step closer to the next thing. And then we're gonna, take it to the next thing. But yeah, learn to be okay with failure, kind of use that to like as a learning experience, get back out there, try again. And
Mhm.
these testings are amazing opportunities to do exactly that, of just like, okay, like these are the things that like were good last time, these are the things that were bad. 8 weeks go by, which is plenty of
Yeah.
time to like get in and race again, get right back to it.
Yeah. Those are great. It is not a report card. We don't need to game the system. There are people like, oh, if I stand up, don't stand up. Especially Tunde, by the way, I did not know. If you do choose to do her FTP test, if you did it at the beginning, don't stand. It's going to screw you up. So it's going to change your numbers just because no one can stand and keep that consistent resistance going. So I would say don't do that.
Yeah, I would say
Yeah,
don't do
I know.
that.
So
Love
decide
change.
if you should test tomorrow or not. see how you feel. How's the week gone for you? Have you followed this week's plan or have you done too much this week and you're not going into it in a rested state? If you don't want to do it tomorrow, in the All Access Library, there's a 1 week plan that I wrote that will get you ready for the test. But you can't just throw a lot of other things on your training calendar, too. You need to make this your priority. So it's there, it's available, and do the best. Olivia told us to stand and you refused. Good, Olivia.
Yeah, and
Olivia.
Lori, I'll be curious. I do have an admission I must throw out there that I have only ever FTP tested literally impromptu, and usually in the
Oh,
middle of the workout. And so
right.
where I have thrown it in is sometimes when I start a workout and I am feeling particularly strong on that day,
Mhm.
and I kind of realized that like I'm not even getting the work that I was hoping for.
Yeah,
I've like stopped the workout dead, popped on the 20-minute test and just gone for it, like right there
yeah,
in the moment. And it's usually when I've been surprised, like when I have
yeah,
like tended to feel good in the body of it. So obviously you and we schedule it out for the
yeah,
specific time. It's like a race prep, and we're trying to do very specific things. We're trying to get enough training stimulus to make a difference, then taper down to a little bit, be a bit rested, and set people up for success. But I when I mentioned like race early and often,
mhm,
I think part of the stigma of it is like people walk around in their head being like, "Oh my god, it's going to be on Saturday. I got to do this
yeah.
thing. It's going to be so hard." But sometimes I would encourage people. It's like, "Hey, listen, if you're just like
Have a good
feeling it,
day.
just
Yeah,
jump in, like give it a go." And you might at that point, like maybe you should be training higher. And this is a
yeah,
great way to find out. And as you mentioned, if nothing else, it's an awesome workout.
it is. I often will take numbers from a hill climb.
Sure.
So
Yeah. Yeah.
around
Yeah.
here, we don't have flat roads. There is no way to do an FTP on a flat road. We don't have them.
Hmm.
And when you have the downhills, unfortunately, that's going to affect your power output. As much as you try to hold
Yep.
your power up, it's really hard because a lot of our downhills
Sure.
are also a little more technical. So I'll go out and do it on a hill climb and I do my normal warm up. I've actually done it. And oh, here's another segue. I'm really good on segues today. I've done it during the Summit Climb event.
Okay.
So doing one
Yeah.
of those climbs, that's a great way to get a 20-minute power. Obviously, it's not going to be at the end of a week
Hmm.
of hill climbing, but it might be on your first day or your second day where you can just go and get your
Hmm.
20-minute power. So good job, Valerie. Good training, 11 watts up. So that's awesome. Maggie Craig, who's on here, thank you, Maggie, who is our summit girl. And she is organizing a Team Wilpers team for the Summit Climb, which is coming up. So
Hmm.
lots of you have been saying, what do we do with these 2 weeks? Well, here you go. You could climb for a week. And there are details
Yeah.
on the Facebook page. So thanks to Maggie for organizing it. The climb is a great event. You get to choose a climb like Everest or Mount Ventoux or Col de
Hmm.
Tourmalet or whatever, and you actually accumulate based on resistance and cadence, elevation gain. So we know we're not really climbing on the Peloton, but you get to simulate it, and it's great. You can register for one of the climbs. You can um, check off the rides that we do, and so yeah, it's a great way to also get some testing in if you want to do that. So there's
Yeah.
more info on there.
It's like
As
bike weight training.
it is. Because and it's interesting because Landon, who runs it, he and I have a little difference in opinion about how we really climb outside.
Mhm.
But he does keep you at a pretty low cadence. I think it's a range of like 68 to 73 or something like
Okay.
that. And then based on the difficulty level you choose, he'll give you resistance and cadence and all of that. And so you just follow the directions. Basically, you're in erg mode, just climbing up.
Right.
So it's good. It's fun. And it's people like goals and they like events and they like to quantify things. And so I think it's a nice thing to do. The other thing, my suggestion is between challenges in this 2 week break is do something you haven't been doing, like laundry um, or some stretching or some resistance training or some mobility work or whatever, ride with friends. We've had this agenda and now we get to do things a little more freeform. So take a little break. Our next challenge is coming up. We are moving back to the Team Wilpers platform. I think we've hinted at that on the Facebook page and answered some questions, but we are going back to the Team Wilpers platform. We do have an app that is in development, and it should be ready for the next challenge after this one. This one will be an 8-week, what we're calling a preseason transition plan. So we're getting ready for some more specific training that's going to come later in the season. We will do some climb training again, some sprint power profile type training. So this one is going to begin March 10th. Registration is now open, and a whole bunch of you registered yesterday. To still my heart. It makes me feel happy. I know. I got the report at the end of yesterday, and I was like, look at that. We're all excited to go again. So we're doing things a little differently. We have a free challenge that will be 3 rides. We're also encouraging folks to sign up for all access, which is the cost of about a latte in New York, $9.95 a month, I think. The cool thing about all access is not only do you get to ride, you also get the running content, you get the strength content, you can do whatever you want to do. We have a bunch of resources there and some pre-built training plans and a bunch of the old challenges. You're like, oh, I want to do a climb because I have something coming up in, let's say, May or June, and you want to focus on climbing. The old climb challenges are there. The sprint challenges are there. So you can choose any of the content you want, but our current challenge or our next challenge will be 3 rides a week. You have the option of 4 or 5. We also have, for the first time, we're doing a Peloton strength class challenge. So we'll actually have Peloton content in there. And what else? Just lots of content. And then the other thing we've been working on for all access are what are the other benefits that we can give you? We obviously have a bunch of discounts for our athletes with different races and different companies, nutrition companies and clothing companies. We are going to include some more video content and written content, and also some private Zooms, which we've been doing some big group Zooms at the end of the challenge, but we'll do some coffee chats with coaches or whatever we decide to call it. So there will be some other opportunities there for us to all spend time together. So I'm excited about that. It should be fun. And John, you've been using the platform for a long time. I think you developed it, didn't you?
Well, yeah, it's it's not without its shortcomings for sure. And
Yeah.
as you said, there's the ambition for a better one. But no, I honestly the contribution of lots of coaches to the content that's there, I think is really great. And so, certainly the Ava's strength training, Ava and Ryan's strength training is my favorite that's available on there right now.
Yeah.
It honestly is what I use currently. Both of them are just incredibly smart minds when it comes to that space. And
Mhm.
so it's been something that, I've very easily incorporated into my routine and will continue to.
Yeah. And I think the nice thing about going back to the platform is we can combine all these resources together. And I think, it's been my goal to bring in lots of people for you to meet, and coaches and athletes and everything else. And I think we'll get to do a lot more of that. So that's what's new next. John, you want to do some rapid fire?
Let's do it.
Okay. You want to go first, or you want me to?
Oh, I didn't know I had to go. I just thought I
Oh,
said,
I'll
okay,
ask you
yeah.
questions
All
then.
right. So
Okay.
I can
Here's an
ask a
easy
quick
one.
question. Fair.
You can go for it.
Bike brand.
Ah, gosh, that's terrible. Loud.
Um, this will be clencher disc brakes.
Flinch or disc brake, 2
Got it.
different things. Tubeless tires, and I run disc brakes, yes.
All right, fair. Yeah, I was like, nobody was going to say clencher, or yeah, or like at this
Oh,
point.
you're thinking rim brakes.
Yeah, rim brakes.
Yeah, rim brakes are dead.
Oh, I know. I still have. It's all I
I
have. And
know,
anyway,
light.
I don't know. I'll turn this over. I was not prepared for. I'm sorry. I
That's
misread this now.
okay. See, Matt
Yeah.
blew it too. Um, Here's one for you, and it
Okay.
can't be your wife, and it can't be Matt. Favorite Peloton
Okay.
instructor?
Oh, I knew you were going to ask this. I was like, I can't answer this. I'll get in too much trouble.
Okay. Here's a good one, though. We talked about this briefly. What's your favorite piece of fitness technology? A wearable, an app, or whatever?
Oh, it's just the GPS watch. Not very exciting, but the GPS watch, I like it with as little features as humanly possible. But I like knowing my pace, my splits, etc. You can,
Yeah.
I should just have like a 1990s Timex at this point, but no, I like my GPS watch.
They're useful for a lot of things.
Mhm.
What's your guilty pleasure?
I wish I could say it's different, but it's wine.
Okay.
Yeah.
Favorite running distance?
Ooh, it's I'm gonna say the half marathon. half
Okay.
marathon.
That's a good I like the time of a half marathon, although 10K was my favorite. 10K to 10 miles. 5K almost killed me. My first one I did, I went really hard with the fast guys and I blew up and I walked. I won one last year, which was good.
Oh,
One of my last races before I had to, unfortunately, my knee decided we were
yeah.
retiring from racing. Well, my ortho told me I was retiring from racing, but yeah, 5K is hard. And I wish I had gotten to explore more because I finally figured out the formula enough to have a good race. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, I'll
Um,
say this not rapid, but continue my long-windedness. I think it may be an interesting thing for people and just I don't think it always has to be the same. The marathon's getting all this glory right now. I've run a lot of marathons. They are great, especially when I was younger. I really loved it. This year, I turned 40 a year ago. Is the first time in my entire life that I ran a track event. Like I started with the 200 meter, did the 800 meter, have done an indoor 5K on indoor track now. And so it's interesting, I've been running forever and ever, but now I'm like a relative beginner in this like new
yeah.
field. And I'm having the most fun. Just the most fun, like being a complete newbie. Like I
Yeah.
did not know the right shoes to wear. I did not know the right way to pace these races. And so, just kind of a reminder, if you will, that like there's a lot of opportunity to shift within these
Mhm.
sports and find like new and exciting things as well. So sorry, not rapid, but
No, I absolutely agree with that, right? So give yourself permission to be a beginner. I started
mhm,
running, I think, because I was getting stale in my cycling and I wanted to
mhm,
do something different. In 5 years, I really focused a lot on running. And it was great because, well, two things. One, I didn't start running until after menopause, so I didn't know how fast I would have been. So I didn't see that decline that a lot of runners see, and it gets very sad. And there's age group racing in running, which there isn't really for, 55 plus women and in bike
until you,
racing, and that
until you
was
get to the
great.
velodrome.
I know. Well, there is at the state level and the national
Yeah,
level, and I think we have a series of 5 races for 55 plus, but 35 plus in bike racing, that's not very old. I mean, I
no,
started racing at 34, I think, or 33. So, yeah, a lot of people are still pros at that age, and so
mhm,
masters 35 plus for women versus men, they have age groups for, like, every month of the life cycle, but,
yeah.
yeah, there
we,
just aren't
we
enough women racers.
we need more ego support, Lori.
I know. I know. I have 2
we're
more
gentle.
questions.
Okay.
Well, there's more racers. So if you could live you love to travel. I love watching your travels with Hannah, and if you could live anywhere else in the world, where would it be?
It's we're New York or nowhere kind of people. We love New York
Yeah.
City. We're lifers in New York, but I just got back from Maui, which I think is about the most special place on the planet. So,
Yeah.
if for some reason I can like, it's one of those like, if I win the lotteries, I won't tell anyone, but there might be signs. So if you see
Yeah.
me full time in Maui, that'll be the my second spot.
I actually when I moved to Santa Cruz, I was kicking myself because I was like, you do this virtual work, you could probably just go spend a few months on Maui and work. But I'm not sure I could live there forever. I think I would feel a
Yeah,
little I have friends who live in Florida or Hawaii and who have lived in Hawaii. And after a while, it becomes a little challenging, I think. There's some limitations
yeah,
to being on a little island in the middle of the Pacific. So,
yes, for sure.
um, okay, we'll close with one more. What's your secret talent?
Secret talent. Oh my. Goodness gracious. I guess I don't talk about a lot, but I certainly cook very often. I'm the cook in our household. Kind of against my will, but no, I was gonna say if I have a secret talent, I'm fairly skilled in the kitchen, and have been able to at least sustain my wife and I for the better part of 10 years. So I'll put that
Yay!
as my secret talent.
That's good. We didn't starve to death, so that's awesome. Anyways, we'll wrap up. I want to say thanks everybody for coming. Find
Indeed.
your chat group on Facebook, register for the next challenge, and good luck to everyone testing tomorrow. And we'll see how that goes. And John, thank you so much for taking your time this morning. This was
Yeah.
awesome. I
My
enjoyed getting to
pleasure.
know you
Thanks.
better.
Yeah, well, we gotta offline some of these conversations for another time, but
I know.
yes, it was a pleasure. Thanks so much, Lori.
Yeah. Bye, everybody.